Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Share Screen Africa's Raptor Education Series. My name is Kalen Padiachi from the KNAV Conservation Foundation, and tonight, our headline speaker, Mr. Cassie Carstens, is going to be talking to us all about, or telling us all about, one of Africa's most charismatic raptor species, or honorary raptor species, let's say, which is, of course, the Secretarybird. He's going to be telling us what he does to conserve these birds, and on what the team at BirdLife South Africa has been doing to make sure we conserve this endangered grassland species throughout their South African range. After chatting to Cassie, we're going to head north to visit Dr. Juliet Wayaki in Kenya to get a sneak preview or sneak peek into what it takes to be a wildlife veterinarian that specializes in birds of prey in East Africa. It's going to be very, very exciting to see some of the work that she does there. Just a heads up, with Dr. Wayaki's video, there are some parts of the video that may be disturbing to sensitive viewers. It has to do with injuries and medical procedures. So just a heads up, if you are a little bit squeamish, that video might not be for you. It's not too bad, I promise. But yeah, just a heads up before we get there. After visiting Juliet, we're going to stop in with our resident raptor specialist, Simon Tomset, to join him on a virtual field trip to try and find some of East Africa's secretary birds up in Kenya. And then, of course, we'll finish off our episode tonight by opening up the floor to you, our esteemed audience members, to ask our panels or chat to our panel members about all the burning raptor questions that that's been pent up over the last week. And then, of course, during the course of our episode, we're going to be sending out another one of those raptor education posters. That's going to be coming to your inbox or your email address, which you use to register for tonight's talk. So keep an eye out for that poster. It's completely copyright free for you guys to download and share as you like. So please jump onto social media immediately and get those posters out there. We want to promote the conservation of Africa's wildlife far and wide. So yeah, share that as soon as you get that. So for those of you that may have missed some of the episodes during the series, or if you're new to this series, or if you just want to rewatch some of your more favorite episodes of the series, go to Share Screen Africa's website, www.sharescreenafrica.org. If you visit the video presentations tab, and then type into the series search box, you can just type in Raptors of Africa, and all the episodes that have passed from the past couple of months will have been uploaded there. Same thing with the posters. If you've missed some of those posters, not to worry, you can find them under each talk. So each talk will have one or more posters attached to it, which you can download free of charge. Otherwise, visit KNAV Conservation Foundation's Facebook page, and you can download those posters straight from there. All right. With that, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce you guys to Mr. Cassie Carstens. Cassie has recently joined BirdLife South Africa as their Secretarybird Conservation Officer, where he concentrates focuses on the monitoring of nesting behavior and distribution of this endangered grassland bird in South Africa's in their South African range. He also actively engages with farmers and other stakeholders to try and promote the conservation of this charismatic species throughout South Africa. He's had the opportunity, and which I'm a little bit jealous of, to work with some of Africa's extremely charismatic species, whether they're southern ground hornbills, Cape parrots. He's had the opportunity to work with them all. He also comes with a huge amount of experience in bird guiding, field guiding, cultural heritage guiding, and I see he's also got a BA honors in heritage cultural tourism and a BSc in geography. So a very, very knowledgeable individual, and we are absolutely honored to have you join us. So without further ado, welcome, Cassie, and the floor is all yours.
Good evening. Thank you, Kaylin. Thank you very much for the very fabulous introduction. I love that picture that you had. It looks like the Secretarybird is going to bite my head off. Thank you also to everyone at Share Screen Africa for this opportunity to share with you the things that we do at BirdLife South Africa with regards to Secretarybird conservation. This evening, I'm just going to have a quick introduction on this absolutely iconic African species and a little bit on their biology and the threats and a few of the things that I do. I can keep you busy for much longer than is allotted to me tonight. So hopefully in the future, you'll be able to tune into some of the BirdLife South Africa talks where we'll be able to expand a little bit more about what we do. So let's get started. If you haven't seen one yet, then I do hope that you see one soon. If you have, then welcome to a very elite group of people that keep tabs on birds in Africa. Secretarybirds is truly one of the most amazing ones out there. Long-legged, absolutely merciless in strolling across Africa's plains, and notorious for their ability to kick snakes to death and then consume them. The scientific name Sagittarius Serpentarius, you can immediately see the link with snakes there, and the species-specific name Serpentarius, snakes. The name for it, the common name, Secretarybird, there's a few possible reasons for the name or possible origins. One of them is this crest that the bird has when it's raised. It looks like someone is putting a pencil behind the ear like a secretary. Others say that the name's origin is slightly lost in time. I'm not sure exactly where I fall. I haven't spent enough time with the species yet in order to have a clear view. A few brief biological points on the species for those of you that haven't read the bird books in that much detail. They live to about 10 to 15 years in the wild, some of them in captivity, of course, a little bit longer. We've had the first signs of breeding with some of the birds that we've tracked in the past at BirdLife South Africa at just under 3 years. We've had a second individual at roughly the same age starting breeding this year. So yeah, that number seems to, that date, that time seems to be the time when the birds start getting busy. Weigh about 4 kilograms, about 2 meters wingspan, 1.5 meters tall. And the most amazing thing that I always am in awe about, 20 to 30 kilometers walking per day. It makes my goal of walking 10,000 steps every day seem slightly puny and insignificant. So it's a bird that truly knows how to endure and how to keep going. If you do encounter them, wherever you do, most likely driving at least through South Africa, some of the long straight roads through grassland and open savanna, you will see them walking. It is truly the odd occasion where you will encounter one flying. In the rest of Africa, I haven't had the privilege of seeing one yet, so I'm not 100% sure, but I assume everything is exactly the same. You will find one of them walking either next to the road, in a reserve, or in an agricultural area. That is what they do and clearly like best. Each year, BirdLife South Africa announces a bird of the year. This species that is selected normally has a bit of a conservation issue that would like to be raised or that we would like to share with the birding community in South Africa and across the continent. And Secretarybird featured in 2019. There was a wonderful poster made that is still available on the BirdLife South Africa website should you wish to go and have a closer look. Also a whole range of educational material if you are a teacher or a lecturer, or even if you just want to enrich the lives of your children. I think, unfortunately, the little plush doll of the Secretarybird is a bit of a very rare item. I had to steal one from one of my former managers, and I don't think they're available anymore. I have one of the last ones, I am proud to say. But please do go have a look if you're interested to learn about other birds of the year that BirdLife South Africa has announced. This year's, for instance, is the Cape Parrot, species, as mentioned by Kaylin earlier, that I've also had the privilege of working with, and also a species that has a bit of a conservation issue that needs to be dealt with. Before we get to the conservation issues, we need to talk a little bit about the thing that they are most notorious for. You'll see there the bottom few images are them eating snakes. That is the main thing that people love about them. Imagery of them consuming large puff adders or eating snakes, kicking them to death, is absolutely iconic in African photography, or African wildlife and bird photography. And as you can see, they do consume quite a number of amazing things. Despite the notoriety for eating snakes and kicking them to death, snakes make up a very small proportion of their diet. So now go and divide it all up. Majority of it, overall, large majority, is insects. Grasshoppers, spiders, beetles, that's what they mostly rely on. Snakes make but a very small percentage, but as with most things that humans sometimes overestimate, we like the snake thing, and therefore we think it's a major part. This diet does differ from area to area, depends on what prey items are most available in the specific habitat that a bird might be living in or might be nesting in, but other things do make up the rest of the diet. One interesting point, for instance, is that they do consume bird eggs as well. They might go and raid, say, for instance, guinea fowl or spurfowl nests, and then consume the eggs and then maybe regurgitate them back. You'll see there in the top right-hand side, there's an image of a female or a male, I can't really tell, about to regurgitate an egg into a nest for some nestlings. On that matter of not being able to tell, let's just point out that there isn't a great deal of sexual dimorphism between the male and the female secretary birds. If you go back very far in some of the first studies conducted or the first descriptions of their behavior in South Africa in the 1970s, it was stated that the females were slightly larger, but then later studies stated that it was the inverse. So not 100% sure. I haven't spent enough time with them, and normally I only see one of the pair or see the pair far off, so I've never really had the opportunity to differentiate up close. But one individual should normally be larger. It might be age related, not 100% sure. On the snake kicking thing, we've got to do this, okay? This is something that's absolutely amazing. This was a study done by the Royal Holloway University, the Hawke Conservancy Trust, and the University of Reading, where they had a female bird in captivity, and they decided to do a little bit of testing to see what they are actually capable of. Now, they put a plastic snake on a pressure plate, and then this female proceeded to have an absolute go at this snake. Now, the measurements came out, as you can see there, at 5 times the force of the normal body weight that the bird could bring to bear on this snake by kicking it. So to give you an idea, I weigh 90 kilograms. If I was to be able to multiply that by 9, I would be a UFC champion. So they are truly able to immobilize very large prey items, very large snakes, very quickly. It's an absolutely wonderful little video, this one that I can stare at for hours on end. I'm sure that you will be able to do the same. Just, yeah, amazing to watch them do it. Should you encounter them in the wild, however, this is the normal thing that you will look out for. I haven't been able to capture it personally yet, despite trying on numerous occasions. I've never been quick enough with my camera to actually catch them in the act. You will see them stalking, walking diligently across the landscape in that manner. And then if something does pique their interest, this bit of a stutter dance before a quick lash out with the feet, and then the prey item is in. So something amazing to keep an eye out for should you do encounter one in the wild. They occur, at least let's start where I work in South Africa, across most of the country. You'll notice that certain areas of this map is marked darker and certain other of the areas are slightly lighter. This is a heat map that I created using citizen science data for the first 6 months of this year. So I recorded in South Africa and made a heat map with the lighter areas where there were fewer sightings and the darker areas where there were more sightings. A caveat for this type of map always using citizen science data is where people travel most and record birds most. You'll notice especially the area to the far northeast where Kruger National Park is situated, and then the area in the top left, you see there's a little, almost a little block That's the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. That's where a lot of people do travel, and that's where a lot of secretary birds are recorded. The rest of the country on the borders between KwaZulu-Natal, Free State, and Mpumalanga is also a hotspot for them. They don't just occur in South Africa. Oh no, they are a sub-Saharan African species. Anywhere where there's a bit of open grassland, open savanna with lightly distributed trees, shrubs, that's where you will find them. The only places that they don't like, the thick forests of the Congo Belt, that's where you won't get them. So if you are tuning in from anywhere else in Africa and you might just be in one of these areas covered in yellow, I hope that you've encountered one of the birds in your area. And let's chat a little bit about how their population is doing. In South Africa, the estimate is that there's about 5,000 individuals remaining. Now, population estimation is always based on how much breeding is taking place or how many times a bird is recorded in citizen science. The breeding thing is something that I'm currently working on personally, trying to record as many nests as possible. And this is what I can share with you to give a bit of background on their breeding behavior. They start breeding late winter and they'll go up into late summer. So currently in South Africa, there are multiple nests that are active, I am very happy to say. The most advanced ones is in the Limpopo province, where the chicks are almost 7 weeks old. In the Eastern Cape, they've started laying eggs. And in the little southwestern corner of the Free State, there's also 1 or 2 nests that are active. The main area of focus of mine is the eastern parts of the Free State province, and hopefully within the next few weeks I'll be able to go and find out what's going on there. Nests are situated on small trees, small shrubs between 3 to 5 meters off of the ground. Normally a tree of a thorny or very dangerous reputation, can be either a sweet thorn, in some cases buffalo thorns, and it needs to have a slightly flattish top. The birds will then stamp it down and start layering branches and pieces of grass on top to create a platform. This platform is, of course, also, you could say, cemented with their feces, and the birds will roost in there and then hopefully start nesting. Females can lay between 1 and 3 eggs. That's the normal average, and they will sit on it for about 45 days. Both sexes will incubate. They take turns. Eggs normally hatch after about those 45 days, and then the nesting period is about 14 weeks. Now, that period, you can see how quickly some of the older nestlings grow. You'll see the major size difference with the 2 top right-hand pictures. And then as they get bigger and bigger, they get a bit more bold, start standing up and start spreading their wings. And at about 10 weeks old, the first more adult birds will start fledging, climbing out of the nest, and they will spend about 6 months in and around their natal nest before dispersing. Now, that natal area is normally about 1 to 2 kilometers that they'll confine themselves to. They are still small birds, young birds, and they're exploring their area, and they're getting to know what it is like to be a secretary bird. However, their dispersal is something that is absolutely amazing. They are known to disperse over vast different distances and end up quite far away from where they were hatched. However, they might return to nest again in their natal area. In one of the cases where we had a bird tracked, it returned very close to its natal nest to start breeding as an adult bird. Now, the bad news, unfortunately, you would recall that I mentioned that for a bird to qualify as the bird of the year in South Africa, there needs to be a bit of a conservation issue. And here's the bad news. The estimate is that in the northern parts of their range, they have declined dramatically. In Namibia, for instance, let's call it in the west parts of Western Africa, a dramatic decline. We are not 100% sure if there are any secretary birds left. In East Africa, also a very, very, very big decline. In Southern Africa, their numbers have decreased dramatically. In South Africa, at least, the estimate is that 75% of their population is gone. I mentioned that we estimate that there's 5,000 individuals left, so just imagine how many of them were prior to this. Now, the problem started over the past, or like this problem took place over the past few decades. In 2004, through the IUCN and BirdLife International, secretary birds were listed as being of least concern. Now, for those of you who don't know what this red listing and conservation status issue is, animal species, plant species are graded according to how threatened they are in their environment. It can be from absolutely no worries about, there's a lot of them out there, to critically endangered or even extinct. Now, secretary birds in 2004, least concern. There wasn't really a worry about their populations throughout their range. But 2011, they were upgraded, downgraded, depends on how you look at it, to vulnerable. And in 2020, that went all the way to endangered. Now, let's quickly just go back to that image. You'll note that I created this, or this map was pulled from eBird. Now, eBird is a citizen science bird recording tool created by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology at the University of Ithaca in New York. eBird is a well-known tool for birders, citizen scientists to record their bird sightings across the world. Now, all those purple blocks that you see spread across Africa, that's where birds have been recorded using eBird. Secretary birds have been recorded. The darker, remember, follow the same type of trend in cartography. The darker, the more species or the more times the bird was recorded, and the lighter, the less. So you can see also, unfortunately, a bit of a bias in the areas in Southern Africa. There's a lot of people using eBird. That's the big catch. If there's a lot of people using a specific tool, then of course the bias will be towards that area. In Southern Africa, that is the case. There's a lot more people using eBird in the southern parts of the continent than in the rest. East Africa, also a few. But you'll see that in the far west, West Africa, there's not a lot of, there's the odd small little purple block. And that might be a contributing factor to that dramatic decline. The birds might still actually be okay, but we just do not have the data to be able to accurately say what their population is. I am going to unashamedly use this evening as an encouragement, a call to action for those of you living in the rest of Africa. If you are in any way serious about bird conservation, and especially these absolutely amazing birds, do consider using eBird when you go out to record birds. You might not see a secretary bird, but all the data that you collect through this app is of critical value to our knowledge on where birds are. Another option that you have is through what's known as Bird Map throughout the rest of Africa, but down here with us, the South African Bird Atlas Project, where through your phone application called BirdLife SA, you are able to record birds quite accurately. It also feeds into this knowledge base of where birds are. So there you have two options. If you haven't used either of them yet, they are very easy to use. There's more than enough educational videos and instructional videos on how to use them. And believe me, this citizen science, scientific tools that's available to your everyday birder is absolutely amazing and critical to bird conservation. So should you now decide to take up one of these tools and go and look for secretary birds, at least, where will you find them? Well, as we mentioned, open grassland, open savanna, and open arid areas with sparsely distributed shrubs. That's where you'll find them. They are quite well known as a grassland bird, but in the rest of the continent, there's not a massive amount of grassland. There's a lot more savanna. So if there's in any way an open area between trees, that's where you might find them. So that's what you look for. They are quite easy to spot, regardless of how far they are in the distance. There's only one bird that looks like this. You might confuse it on a bad day in a very far away viewing with a blue crane, but a blue crane doesn't walk like a secretary bird walks, let me tell you that. Protected areas you would immediately think should be one of the spots where you should go and find them. But unfortunately, the bad news is that with all the birds that we've tracked throughout the years, we've only encountered less than 3% of all the points collected within South Africa's protected areas. So if I can now go back one step, you'll notice everything in green is our protected areas in South Africa. It's now national parks, nature reserves, protected areas, you name it. It covers about 9% of the country's total area. And all those little blue spots in this one is tracks dropped by 10 young birds that we fitted small solar-powered GPS trackers to. And that's how they moved. That dispersal that we spoke about, you'll notice that the one bird went all the way into Botswana before turning around and coming back. So they do travel on a very, very, very broad scale, but very rarely into protected areas. Or again, maybe biased that we picked birds that didn't like protected areas, or that the areas that we fitted the GPS trackers on, the birds really didn't have a lot of protected areas in their immediate environment. So it might be biased in that way. But if you want to find secretary birds, you will find them outside of these protected areas mostly. That's the strange thing regarding these birds, which of course now leads immediately to a bit of a problem, that outside of protected areas, there seems to be a lot more threats that face them than you would think within a national park, for instance. The first thing is a few problems that stand in their way, or that might be described as the causes for this population decline. Habitat loss, as with so many other species across the globe, is one of the main drivers. Now, in South Africa specifically, again, apologies for not knowing much more about the rest of the continent. I assume it might be slightly similar. Grasslands especially have declined incredibly. It's one of the most threatened biomes across the globe. And in South Africa, the area that secretary birds seem to rely on most is under extreme threat. And the other issue with climate change, increased carbon dioxide in the air, increased bush encroachment, woody cover in these grasslands or open areas, there is less space for the secretary birds to move around. We found that if shrub cover, small plant cover gets too high, secretary birds don't really like an area anymore and will disperse out of that specific area. So both those things, loss of habitat due to human anthropomorphic expansion, land use changes, and then of course bush encroachment are serious threats to their habitat. And I assume it's not just in South Africa. This is the one that's always a bit of a problem. We do work closely with our colleagues in the Endangered Wildlife Trust and main power provider in South Africa, Eskom, to deal with collisions with linear infrastructure, power lines. Now, over the past few years, we've recorded quite a number of secretary birds that have collided with power lines, and we hope to investigate this in a bit more detail, taking all the tracking data that we've recorded over the past decade and a half and coming up with some form of a risk assessment of how frequently secretary birds do come in contact with these types of infrastructure over long distances, and what can possibly be done to mitigate the threats that these birds face. And just over 100 records of secretary birds that has been recorded having collided with power lines over the last 2 decades. Another problem, unfortunately, fence entanglements. If an old fence is not well maintained, the lines that make up the fence might become slightly soft. Secretary birds might get entangled. It's not just the problem with secretary birds. There are many other bird species that get entangled in this nature. But these are just some of the threats that the birds face that we must be aware of, and that we at BirdLife South Africa and our partners across South Africa affiliated with BirdLife International are actively working on to try and mitigate. Now, how are we going to do this? We're still working hard, coming up with some ideas. So do watch this space. We hope to eventually come up with a few ideas to encourage both farmers to adapt fences in a certain way that will be wildlife friendly, that we can mitigate electricity distribution networks across South Africa, maybe across the continent, and that we can in some manner create an advisory body to ensure that the agricultural community is aware of the threats that secretary birds and other bird species face, so that agricultural practices are aligned with the best needs for us as humans, but also for secretary birds and those other birds that rely on those areas. Now, I've mentioned already one way, using 2 possible apps that you can contribute to secretary bird conservation in South Africa, and please do use them. BirdLife SA or eBird. They are available both on Apple and on Android, so you will find them in whichever store you prefer, on whichever mobile device that you choose. Another option, should you be across the continent, doesn't necessarily need to be in South Africa, please report Secretarybird nests if you do know of one. I have a list of almost 200 nests now spread across the continent. There's a few in Kenya that I know of, there's a few in Botswana that I know of, and then of course the majority of them here in South Africa. But if you do by any chance know of one or know of someone that might, please do let us know. There's a link available on the BirdLife South Africa's website under our Secretarybird page, where you are able to report your sightings for Secretarybird. So yeah, please do go ahead. As I mentioned, I have almost 200 of them. I think I have 186 so far in South Africa, at least for this year. My goal is before the end of the year to get to 200. So yeah, keep fingers crossed, and with your help, with other citizen scientists contributing, I'm sure that I'll be able to get there. And you'll notice just below that specific red block, there's also the option, if you ever find a bird entangled in a fence, there's also an option to report that. We do like to keep track of that, just how frequently it occurs. So yes, if you know of a nest, or if you find a bird entangled in a fence, do please report it to us. It is used for conservation and scientific research purposes. Thank you in advance. I really appreciate it. And thank you very much for this opportunity. There's a whole lot of people that have been involved with the research and the fieldwork that I'm conducting, a lot of landowners that have been so kind as to open their properties to me so that I can walk around, climb trees, look for Secretarybird's nest, and then a whole lot of my colleagues that have been integral in working hard and making my life a little bit easier. And of course, thank you very much to each and every one of you for tuning in tonight. The fact that you are interested in Africa's raptors is already a feather in your cap. So keep up the good work. If you do want to reach out for more information or get in touch with regards to a nest on your property, there are the contact details. You are welcome to reach out any time of the day, and look forward to hearing from you a little bit later with any questions. So yes, thank you very much for your attention this evening, and back to you, Caleb.
Very important message there of citizen science in conservation, important role. So jump onto those apps that Cassie mentioned and start sharing the data. That'll be great. Also, that's a great point that you make that ties into those posters that we have. You would have seen in your email inbox that those posters have just been sent out. Please, guys, share those posters far and wide. It all contributes to the conservation of secretary birds in this case, as well as our other African birds of prey. With that, I think it's time to head up to Kenya to visit Juliet and see what it's like to be a wildlife veterinarian specializing in birds of prey. Just a reminder, some of the images may be a little bit disturbing, but yeah, I promise it's not too bad.
Here I have a steppe buzzard, but first let me introduce my professional raptor handler. He's a technician here at the Raptor Center, John Chalo. So the steppe buzzard is from the Buteo family, and this comes from the Russian steppes, came in with electrocution. It could have been electrocuted anywhere on the migratory path, but the real reason why it came in was actually for clinical starvation, because it had lost a foot. You can see this is an artificial foot that we placed in. So it was unable to feed. So as a result of the electrocution, it would have died of clinical starvation. Bumblefoot has a guarded prognosis. It's a very common condition in captive rehabs. So at the moment what I'm doing, I'm removing the shoe cast foam that we put just to even the distribution of weight and pressure from the pad itself. So I'm going to remove that and replace it, an activity we do every 2 weeks just to ensure there's no infection. So we've seen tremendous recovery on this particular patient, and that's why we are hopeful and continue with the tender love and care management. So I'm just going to wet the surface with a bit of iodine, because the scab has been there for 2 weeks and it's quite hard to peel off, and if I remove very harshly, I'm going to take off the scab. That's really the healing tissue on that area. I think we're ready to remove it now, and we can see the progress. Oh wow, this is looking very well. There's no pus. You can see here the scab is quite dry. There's no pus, which is a good sign, because it means that a fibrous tissue is going to form here and form almost like a bony scab. And the whole idea is that the shoe cast form distributes the weight to the toes as opposed to at the center of the foot, which is where the bumblefoot develops. I believe that a major role of rehabilitation, and where more veterinarians could intervene, is that rehab and managing these clinical cases acts as a watchdog for what's out there. For example, like this is a case of electrocution. I mean, it could have happened anywhere between Russia and Kenya, but by seeing this and seeing how often more cases of electrocution are being admitted at the clinic, you're able to understand what are the causes of mortalities in the wild and how we can find solutions for those. For example, if we're going to talk about insulation of power lines and all that, you're able to recognize, are more patients coming in from poisoning cases or electrocution or other, let's say, persecution. So I'm placing the shoe cast form. This is where we start before placing the last cast, white cast that you saw we were removing. We first put a rubber tube which just forms as a cushion, and I'm using the white tape just to secure it. As you can see, we've secured the rubber tube with the tape, so this just forms, this is just a cushion. In the middle over here, which is our major concern, I'm going to put some silver nitrate. The silver nitrate is a chemical antibiotic, and we find it useful to manage open infections such as this. That this is formed, we're going to use a water sensitive adhesive just to put this around. The reason why I prefer this type of glue is because it has aeration, like it's not compact like a plaster of Paris. This one gives it space to air, so you're sure that the tissue will not become necrotic from lack of circulation. Okay, I'm just going to put it around and just a little at the center. Okay, so I'll just splash some water. Like I said, it's water sensitive so that it poofs up, and then you don't want it to poof up too much, so I'm using all-purpose flour. So I'll use the all-purpose flour just to give it a bit of, to make it a bit compact. The advantage of this particular kind of glue is the aeration and how, it's soft and everything, but that could be a limitation because you also want it for the 2 weeks that it will be on. So that's why we put the all-purpose flour, just to give it a bit of body. I like to draw out my ideas, so this is a Simon Tomset art, and it's really just a picture of what's going on because it's easy to explain with diagrams and you're able to really visualize it in your head as well. This is how it looked like. You could tell the scab has increased in size, and now we are putting the shoe cast to distribute the weight to the toes, as you can see, as opposed to the center. This is the end product. You can see there's a dip at the center which creates like a hollow, and the sides are resin, and this will stay on for 2 weeks or so. The adhesive glue is now compact, and this will be able to stay in for the next 2 weeks or so. And yeah, I hope to inspire through my journey, and I hope you're able to really appreciate the role and the majesty of raptors, and not just for the ecological role, which is very important, but especially for the intrinsic value, because when it comes down to it, it's really the things we care about just because we care for them and no other reason or any benefit to us as humans. I can't really pinpoint the shift or the time in which I showed interest in raptors as opposed to other disciplines, because in veterinary, every discipline has its own uniqueness and the little joys that it will bring to your life. But what I can really pinpoint is that there's a massive difference with the raptor medicine in the specialities and the standard procedures that are taught, especially in school, and the role of specialized experts in the field as opposed to the typical veterinary aspects.
Thank you very much, Juliet, for that very interesting procedure that you showed us. I think it's time to visit with Simon Tomset again to see if we can find some East African secretary birds.
Secretary birds are in an order of their own. It's very unique bird of prey, possibly not even related to birds of prey, and it's a terrestrial, long-legged, lanky bird that hunts in the open savannas and grasslands and nests in really quite small trees. The secretary bird is a unique raptor in an order of its own. It's long-legged, has a short hind talon, but not in the same way as a bustard. It is actually quite a strong hind talon, quite capable of gripping snakes and lizards and hares. It's actually quite predaceous and quite capable of flying very well. It also soars extremely high. It has long feathers that stick out the back of its head, and apparently this is the root of its name, is that it looked like the secretaries of old who used to use quills and put them behind their ears. There's another root that's supposed to be called Secretar, meaning that it's the hawk of the ground, ter as in French for meaning the ground. Nobody's really too sure exactly where the root of the term secretary bird comes from. It's an elegant bird, walking all day, chasing down insects, game birds, hares, even young Thompson's gazelles it's been recorded killing. It definitely is a bird of prey in every way. It often will swallow large animals such as rodents and hares and then fly back to the nest and regurgitate them to its chicks. And in many ways is extremely vulnerable to humans. It can really only exist now in protected areas and remote areas. Its nesting choice is rather quite too close and is easily disturbed by people. It is now being identified as a bird in critical need of conservation actions. The secretary bird has an eagle-like lifestyle. It does have defended territories. They're quite widely spaced. We know of them being up to about 2 kilometers apart, but sometimes as much as 10-15 kilometers apart in dry areas. They come to the nest and nest like an eagle. In many ways they behave exactly like eagles. They produce 1 to 2 chicks, very rarely 3. When the chicks leave the nest, they look really quite like an adult. There are only a few subtle differences, and they often walk off and join large groups. It used to not be that uncommon to see groups as many as half a dozen secretary birds walking around on the plains of the East African plains such as Athi, and certainly in the dry areas in northeastern Kenya. You could get to see as many as 10 to 12 individuals all walking together. It's also something that does occur in the Kalahari, where you can get as many, I believe, as 30 all foraging together. They are definitely very weird birds and not really closely related to eagles, but they do behave very much like them. As a conservation concern, they are extremely vulnerable to humans because of their nesting in short trees. Also fire, which is very prevalent in Africa. We burn the size of the Australian continent every year in Africa. That's taking out an enormous amount of trees as well as foraging areas for secretary birds. Nobody knows too much about their movements. It's definitely a species that needs to be studied. It could be that there is a big movement east and west across sub-Saharan Africa, copying that of other birds such as the grasshopper buzzard or swallow-tailed kite. It is a bit of an enigma and definitely in need of more study and more conservation effort. The secretary bird is famous for killing snakes. It's the expectation of every documentary to see them stamping snakes to death. In reality, they do so quite rarely. One, there's not many snakes today to kill. That really is a very important point. There's virtually nothing in the way of snakes to kill. They do like to take rodents and lizards, but they're quite capable of flying down Franklin. Many years ago, I used to have a plane that was made out of a parachute and an engine, and it flew at exactly the same speed as the secretary birds that were flying beneath me, flying slowly, and they will run after them as they zigzag through the grass, or they will fly after them. They're quite capable of flying down yellow-necked spurfowl, as well as guinea fowl and Shelley's Franklin. So we see them literally chasing after the birds. As they fly, they will just fly behind them, sometimes quite fast, and then land on the ground and then carry on to chase them until they exhaust their prey and catch them and then beat them to death, in effect. They're very effective as hunters. They're often taking insects, and one often sees them stamping and listening quite hard and then sort of experimenting by thumping their foot up and down. A bit like an open-bill stork or a yellow-billed stork sitting in the water. They will vibrate their foot until something jumps out and runs away.
Wait for the second.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's something really bad with its foot.
Funny, I think I might have seen this one. So obviously they took the string off.
Yeah, I guess that was it. No, there it is, yeah.
That's been put on deliberately.
Yeah.
Look, it's gone round and round and round. You're filming that?
Yeah.
Somebody has wrapped and wrapped and wrapped it round and round and round and round. Brilliant. The bird had its foot tied by somebody with what looks like very strong cord that you use for sewing up shoes. And as a result, the bird had to walk around with its foot sort of clubbed over. And it's the bones have been exposed, and the bones are going to come out the top of the toe. But funny thing is I think the toe is still alive. Certainly the other two are still alive. And if we can get the infection to go away, then there's a good chance that it might be able to recover the use of its foot good enough for a release. You can go around on two feet, not a problem. See what I'm saying? You can go around with 2 toes on 1 foot. So far, see, the bones could be missing inside the foot, and that's okay. It's hot, which means it's still alive, which is good. I'm going to give it also an injection of antibiotics. No, I'll give it oral antibiotics. So this is what you do your shoes with.
It's a shoelace, huh?
Well, you know when you sew your shoes.
Oh, okay.
And somebody must have taken a long while. Well, who's to say that the rest of the leg is not necrotic? And this part doesn't actually, you see the bones coming through here? So it's been standing on the top of its foot. My thought is this is probably going to be captive for life. Because he's had this tied up over here, I think the tendons have not been able to open, so he's been walking about on a club foot, and he's been walking around on the top of his foot, and because of that he's eroded all the flesh away and the bones are coming out through the top of the foot. There's really no need to do surgery at this point. Just going to try to make sure that the infection goes away and try to return the use of the other two toes. If he loses that middle toe, that really might not be a big problem. These guys are not, as people always think, snake eaters. They eat a lot. About 90% of what they eat are insects, grasshoppers and rodents. I've covered him in pyrethrum dust because he's absolutely covered in lice. And that means he's really quite chronically ill, very depressed, and when they are, they get covered in lice. So he's got pyrethrum powder there, which is about as safe as you're going to be able to get. Still not super safe, so you have to make sure that doesn't get into its food. So we're giving him these boots. My hope is that he'll be able to open this foot in time. Right now is day 1. I don't suppose this thing is going to be anywhere near release for another 6 months or so, which is a real shame because it's an adult, and right now they probably got chicks. Everybody, all the others have got chicks. Clever bird. These things are so easy in captivity. They follow you around. Even after the first week or two in captivity, they're very intelligent. There.
Kuja tu.
Good.
All right. Thank you once again to Simon for that field trip, and of course for your dedication that you show Africa's birds of prey. I think with all the species in your care, I don't think we tend to take you for granted a little bit sometimes. So thank you for that, Simon. I'm not too sure if you're in the audience, but you are a rock star. I do apologize for not having my video on, but my internet is not playing ball with me tonight. So just to preserve some of that bandwidth, I'm going to keep my video off for now. We have quite a few questions coming through specifically for Cassie, but I do believe Juliet is in the audience tonight, so that's excellent. If anybody has any questions for Juliet regarding the procedure that she was conducting on screen, I'm sure she'll be happy to chat to you about that. I think let's get started with some of the questions we have. In fact, before we do that, for anybody that has any questions, there's a couple ways you can go ahead and ask them. For those that are new to the series, you're welcome to just raise your hand if you have a question. If you would like to ask it in person, you can go to the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. When you click that reactions button, there's a raise hand function. Just click that and we'll be able to see your hand, and you can we'll ask you for your question from there. Otherwise, if you'd rather type in your question in the chat, we are monitoring the chat strings, so we'll be able to get to your question there as well. So I think in the meantime, let's get started with our questions. The first one that we have is from Sybil, and I believe it's for Cassie. How are such data on diet obtained? Stomach analysis for which many birds have to be killed.
Luckily, no birds required to be killed. Most of the observations with secretary birds are observational on their diet. So you kind of just sit with a very strong pair of binoculars monitoring what they eat, what they consume. Some cases you can't really see, some cases you can. Another option was to deploy camera traps at nesting sites where we are able to then record what the parents bring home. I know that the bad old school choice of having to kill a bird to determine what it's eating, that has luckily completely fallen away. That was way long ago. I know the last time I learned of it was during an ethics course that I did at the University of Cape Town, where they spoke about that was the only way that they could study albatross diets was by shooting birds and looking at what they had in their stomachs. Luckily with secretary birds, not necessary. It's never been necessary, I believe, as far as I know. So yeah, that one is luckily not a bad news question.
Yeah, and also for a lot of your raptor species, they regurgitate pellets. So that's another old school way that we tend to do a lot of diet analysis is collecting these pellets specifically around their roost trees or their nesting trees, and you can go through that. But that is a far more involved in-depth process, which can get quite tedious after a while. But yeah, we are very fortunate that we don't have to kill birds anymore for gut analysis, which is great.
I can share quickly, Kelly. Let me share quickly what those pellets look like. This is an image.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
Let me see if I can do this. This is an image of an active nest, the one in Limpopo that I spoke about in the presentation. It's got the 2 chicks on. You'll notice that the way that I get these images is with a long pole with a GoPro at the top. I haven't upgraded to a drone yet. I hope to. But 2 nestlings at this stage, they were between 6 and 7 weeks old. And if you now look closely just to the right of the right-hand bird, there's all these things that look like little brown, little grayish blobs. And those are the castings that the bird do. Now, a lot of birds do this. It's probably most known with owls. If you have heard of owls casting pellets, that is basically what it is. It's all the undigestible material of meat-eating birds that is collected in the crop and then regurgitated as this little pellet, this little block of bone, hair, and other cartilage material that is not digestible. So that's what it looks. Not a brilliant picture, but that's the easiest thing I can do for you right now.
That's perfect. Thanks for that, Cassie. The next question was from Fiona. Will more than one chick survive, or is siblicide common?
No, this is one of the ways in which they differ from other raptor species is there's no siblicide. So you would have noticed in some of those images on the nests, and the one that I've just showed you, there's 2 chicks on it. So if everything goes well, and we're not talking that there's no nest predation, sometimes by owls, sometimes if the nest is slightly low or easily accessible via the ground, servals might get in, then there might be a problem. But if there's enough food, then all chicks will survive and fledge. That's one of the good things about these birds is they're not as ruthless as other raptor species with regards to killing siblings.
Perfect. The next question we had from Emmanuel. In fact, Emmanuel had 2 questions for you. First one, do you promote active local community members' involvement in the conservation of secretary birds? And secondly, how do you engage all the relevant stakeholders to ensure open ecosystem and integrated secretary bird conservation and management in South Africa?
Well, thank you, Emmanuel, for an absolutely amazing question. Double question, kind of like showing me the best. The main answer I can give you is I'm still in my beginner shoes in this position. So I do have big dreams of expanding this in not just necessarily South Africa, but within the entire region of their distribution. So local community, I am still in the process of learning exactly how to do that. I did mention in the chat that I will hopefully be able to follow the guidelines, or the playbook, I called it, created by the Mabula Ground Hornbill Project with their work with local communities, especially in KwaZulu-Natal. I wish to go and learn from them. They have their main community liaison is Ntabiseng Monama. She has been absolutely amazing with the work that she's done. So I will go and learn from her how to engage with local communities in depth, and I will need to work on especially my isiZulu. I can speak a little bit of Setswana, a little bit of Sotho, but I'll need to work on my isiZulu if I want to at least start working in KwaZulu-Natal. The second one, the relative stakeholders and the broader conservation management issues with regards to the species, well, that'll be a long-term project. It's working closely with farming communities. It is working closely with those local communities, getting them involved, working closely with various conservation bodies, whether they're at a non-governmental or at a governmental level, to hopefully eventually create something like a biodiversity management plan. Now, that plan is something that is published by our main Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, which mandates that an endangered species needs to be managed and cared for in a lot greater intensity than is possible without a set of guidelines. So that is the long-term goal that I at least have with this project, is to reach a point where there is this type of a guideline with all stakeholders across the board being able to contribute. Because yes, as some of the other comments has shown, these birds occur in areas across the continent, mainly outside of protected areas. So those people in the farming communities, the agricultural areas, the local areas, they need to be as involved as those in the protection area or the protected areas. So watch the space. We'll see what happens. Still a long way to go, though.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cassie, for that. And thank you, Emmanuel, for those questions. Definitely very, very good questions indeed. The next question we have is from Ulrich Oberpiller. Ulrich, great to see you online again. Just for folks who didn't know, Ulrich presented a talk for us earlier in the series, and we are fortunate enough to have him presenting another one next week. So please, for all of you that are thinking of joining, you do not want to miss this one. So Ulrich wanted to find out, his question was, while compiling my Raptor Guide of South Africa, I looked at thousands and thousands of photographs. I noticed that some young secretary birds have bright yellow eyes, but I could not find any literature reference to that. Thus, I consulted many raptologists. Some had noticed this in passing. Thus, I am still unsure if this is a regular characteristic and whether it is linked to sex or whatever. Any comments on that, Cassie?
I did chat to Ulrich in the chat box quickly, but let me try and give you what I have here. I'm just trying to get these images lined up so that I can copy them over. Hang on, and then I'll... Yes, it worked. Right, let me just try and get this going. So the closest I got to reading something along the same lines was in the description by Alan Kemp, who studied a couple of nests outside of Pretoria. I think it was the 1970s, where he described that facial coloration might differ. And I've got one image here. I've quickly compiled it. Bird, which I now need to flip and zoom in, and it doesn't go. Okay, it's not going to work as well as I hoped it would work, but let's just do them one by one. So first image of a nestling. Let's do that one. Wasn't taken by me. Can't remember who this was taken by, but there you go. So these are two nestlings. You can see they're almost ready to climb out. Light colored eyes. That's the best I could get quickly here in my library of bird pictures. And then the second one is an image that I recently took. This was in the Eastern Cape. This is an adult bird, and you can see also the slightly greenish yellow eye. So Ulrich, not 100% sure whether there's a major difference. I haven't seen enough secretary birds to be able to tell you. I have only seen those two youngsters on the nest. Those are the only ones that I've encountered so far. So hopefully if I've got a few more secretary birds under my belt, I'll be able to tell you a little bit more, but it's an interesting thing. As I did describe to you that the facial coloration, you could see the difference. This adult bird, the